The Muqaddimah Chapter 6 Part 4. 21. Astronomy. This science studies the motions of the fixed stars and the planets. From the manner in which these motions take place, astronomy deduces by geometrical methods the existence of certain shapes and positions of the spheres requiring the occurrence of those motions which can be perceived by the senses. Astronomy thus proves, for instance, by the existence of the precession of the equinoxes, that the center of the Earth is not identical with the center of the sphere of the Sun. Furthermore, from the retrograde and direct motions of the stars, astronomy deduces the existence of small spheres, epicycles, carrying the stars, and moving inside their great spheres. Through the motion of the fixed stars, astronomy then proves the existence of the eighth sphere. It also proves that a single star has a number of spheres, from the observation that it has a number of declinations, 669 and similar things. Only astronomical observation can show the existing motions and how they take place, and their various types. It is only by this means that we know the precession of the equinoxes and the order of the spheres in their different layers, as well as the retrograde and direct motions of the stars, and similar things. The Greeks occupied themselves very much with astronomical observation. They used instruments that were invented for the observation of the motion of a given star. They called them Astrolabes. The technique and theory of how to make them, so that their motion conforms to the motion of the sphere, are a living tradition among the people 670. In Islam, only very little attention has been paid to astronomical observation. In the days of Al-Ma'mun, there was some interest in it. The construction of the instrument known as the astrolabe was begun but was not completed 671 when Al-Ma'mun died. The institution of astronomical observation was lost and neglected. Later on, scholars based themselves upon the ancient observations. These were of no use because of the change in the motions of the stars over the course of time. The motion of the instrument used in astronomical observations conforms only approximately to the motion of the spheres and the stars and is not absolutely exact. When a certain amount of time has elapsed, the differences are revealed. Astronomy is a noble craft. It does not, as is generally thought, teach the real form of the heavens nor the order of the spheres, but it teaches that the forms and shapes of the spheres are the result of those motions. As one knows, it is not improbable that one and the same thing may produce two different results. Therefore, when we say that the motions produce a result, we merely deduce from the existence of what produces the result that the result exists, but the statement in no way teaches us the real character of the resulting thing. Still, astronomy is an important science. It is one of the pillars of the mathematical discipline 672. One of the best works on the subject is the Majesty, or Magest. 673. It is ascribed to Ptolemy, who, as the commentators of the work have established, was not one of the Greek rulers called Ptolemy. The leading Muslim philosophers have abridged Ptolemy's work. Avicenna, for instance, did that. He inserted his abridgment in the mathematical section of the Shifa. Ptolemy's work was also 674. Abbreviated by the Spanish philosopher Averroes, by Ibn as-Sam, and by Ibn as-Salt, 675 in the Kitab al-Iqtisar. Ibn al-Farqh 676 wrote an abridged astronomy. In it, he treated the subject along more easily understandable lines. He omitted the geometrical proofs. God taught man what he did not know. 677. Astronomical Tables 678. A subdivision of astronomy is the science of astronomical tables. This is a craft based upon calculations according to arithmetical rules. It is concerned with the courses of motions peculiar to each star and with the character of that motion, fast, slow, direct, retrograde, and so on, as proven by astronomical means. This serves to show the positions of the stars in their spheres at any given time, by calculating their motions according to the rules evolved from astronomical works. This craft follows certain norms. They constitute a sort of introductory and basic material for it. They deal with months and days and past eras. 679. It, further, follows established basic principles. They deal with apogee and perigee, declinations, 680 the different kinds of motions, and how these things shed light upon each other. They are written down in well-arranged tables, in order to make it easy for students. These tables are called Zij. The determination of the positions of the stars at a given time by means of this craft is called adjustment and tabulation. 681. Both early and later scholars have written many works on the subject. Among such scholars, for instance, were Al-Battai 682 and Ibn al-Kamad 683. Recent contemporary Maghribi scholars are using, as their reference work, the Zij that is ascribed to Ibn Shakyu. 684. It is thought that Ibn Shakyu based his work on astronomical observations. A Jew in Sicily who was skilled in astronomy and the mathematical sciences, and who occupied himself with astronomical observation, sent Ibn Shakyu information on the conditions and motions of the stars he had ascertained. Thus, the Maghribis have been using Ibn Shakyu's work, because they assume that it is based upon reliable information. Ibn al-Ba, 685 wrote an abridgment of Ibn Shakyu's Zij, which he entitled Al-Mihaj. People have been very eager to use the Mihaj, because the operations described in it are easy. Knowledge of the positions of the stars in the spheres is the necessary basis for astrological judgments, that is, knowledge of the various kinds of influence over the world of man that are exercised by the stars depending on their positions and that affect religious groups, dynasties, human activities, and all events. We shall explain this later on, and we shall clarify the evidence adduced by astrologers, if God, He is exalted, wills. 22. The Science of Logic 686. Logic concerns the norms enabling a person to distinguish between right and wrong, both in definitions that give information about the essence of things, and in arguments that assure apperception. This 687 comes about as follows. The basis of perception is the sensibilia that are perceived by the five senses. All living beings, those which are rational as well as the others, participate in this kind of perception. Man is distinguished from the animals by his ability to perceive universals, which are things abstracted from the sensibilia. Man is enabled to do this by virtue of the fact that his imagination obtains, from individual objects perceived by the senses and which agree with each other, a picture conforming to all these individual objects. Such a picture is a universal. The mind then compares the individual objects that agree with each other, with other objects that, also, agree with them in some respects. It thus obtains a picture conforming to both of the two groups of objects compared, inasmuch as they agree with each other. In this way, abstraction continues to progress. Eventually, it reaches the universal concept, which admits no other universal concept that would agree with it, and is, therefore, simple. For instance, from the individual specimens of man, the picture of the species to which all the individual specimens conform is abstracted. Then, man, the human species, is compared with the animals, and the picture of the genus to which both men and animals conform is abstracted. Then, this is compared with the plants, until, eventually, the highest genus is reached, which is substance. 688 There is no other universal concept that would in any way agree with it. Therefore, the intellect stops here and makes no further abstraction. God created in man the ability to think. Through it, he perceives the sciences and crafts. Knowledge is either a perception, tasawwur, of the essence of things, tasawwur meaning a primitive kind of perception not accompanied by the exercise of judgment, or it is apperception, tasdiqu, that is, the judgment that a thing is so. Man's ability to think may try to obtain the desired information by combining the universals with each other, with the result that the mind obtains a universal picture that conforms to details outside. Such a picture in the mind assures a knowledge of the quiddity of the individual objects. Or, man's ability to think may judge one thing by another and draw conclusions from the one thing as to the other. Thus, the other thing is established in the mind. This is apperception. In fact, apperception ultimately reverts to perception, because the only use of having perception is to achieve knowledge of the realities of things, which is the required goal of apperceptive 689 knowledge. Man's ability to think may embark on this process in either the right or the wrong way. Selection of the way to be followed by man's ability to think in its effort to attain the knowledge desired requires discernment, so that man can distinguish between right and wrong. This process became the canon of logic. When the ancients first began to discuss logic, they did so in a sententious, disconnected manner by selecting certain stray propositions. Logical methods were unimproved. The problems of logic were not seen together. Eventually, Aristotle appeared among the Greeks. He improved the methods of logic and systematized its problems and details. He assigned to logic its proper place as the first philosophical discipline and the introduction to philosophy. Therefore, Aristotle is called the first teacher. 690 His work on logic is called the text. 691 It comprises 8 books, 691 are on the forms of analogical reasoning, and 5 on the matter, to which analogical reasoning is applied. This is because the objects of apperception are of different kinds. Some of them concern things that are certain by nature. Others concern things that are hypothetical in various degrees. Therefore, logic studies analogical reasoning from the point of view of the desired information it is expected to yield. It studies what the premises of the desired information ought to be, as seen in this light, and to which kind of certain or hypothetical knowledge the desired information belongs. Logic studies analogical reasoning, the syllogism, not with some particular object in mind but exclusively with regard to the way in which it is produced. Therefore, the first study, it is said, is undertaken with regard to matter, that is, the matter that produces some particular certain or hypothetical information. The second study, it is said, is undertaken with regard to the form and the manner in which analogical reasoning, the syllogism, in general is produced. Thus, the number of the books on logic came to be 8. The first book deals with the highest genera that abstraction among the sensibilia may attain in the mind and that admit no more universal genera above them. It is called Kitab al-Markiat, categories. The second book deals with the various kinds of apperceptive propositions. It is called Kitab al-Ibarat, hermeneutics. The third book deals with analogical reasoning, the syllogism, and the form in which it is produced in general. It is called Kitab al-Qiyas, Analytics. Here ends the logical study from the point of view of its form. The fourth book is the Kitab al-Burha, Apodeictica. It studies the kind of analogical reasoning, the syllogism, that produces certain knowledge. It also studies the problem of why its premises must be certain ones. In particular, it mentions other conditions for yielding certain knowledge. For instance, the premises must be essential, primary, and so on. This book contains a discussion of determinative 692 and definitions, because one wants them to be certain, since it is necessary, nothing else is possible that a definition conform to the thing defined. Therefore, definitions were treated by the ancients in this book. The fifth book is the Kitab al-Jadal, Topics. Jadal, disputation, is the kind of analogical reasoning that shows how to cut off a troublesome adversary and silence one's opponent, and teaches the famous methods to be employed to this end. It is also concerned with other conditions required in this connection. They are mentioned here. The book deals with the places, topoi, from which the syllogism is evolved by using them to clarify the so-called middle term that brings the two ends of the desired information together. 693. It also deals with the conversion of terms. The sixth book is the Kitab as-Safsata, Sophisticae Leci. Sophistry is the kind of analogical reasoning that teaches the opposite of the truth and enables a disputant to confuse his opponent. The book is bad because of its purpose. It was written only so that one might know sophistical reasoning and be on guard against it. The seventh book is the Kitab al-Kitaba, Rhetoric. Rhetoric is the kind of analogical reasoning that teaches how to influence the great mass and get them to do what one wants them to do. It also teaches the forms of speech to be employed in this connection. The eighth book is the Kitab ash-Shia, Poetics. Poetics is the kind of analogical reasoning that teaches the invention of parables and similes, especially for the purpose of encouraging oneself and others to undertake something or avoid doing something. It also teaches the imaginary propositions 694 to be employed in this connection. These are the 8 books on logic according to the ancients. After logic had been improved and systematized, the Greek philosophers were of the opinion that it was necessary to discuss the 5 universals, providing the perception that 695 conforms to the quiddities outside or to their parts or accidents. The 5 are genus, difference, species, property, and general accident. 696. Therefore, they took the subject up in a special book concerned with the 5 universals, which serves as an introduction to the discipline. Thus, the books on logic came to be 9. All of them were translated in Islam. The Muslim philosophers wrote commentaries and abridgments of them. Al-Farabi and Avicenna, for instance, did this, and, later on, the Spanish philosopher, Averroes. Avicenna wrote the Kitab ash-Shifa, 697, which comprises all the 7 philosophical disciplines. Later on, more recent scholars have changed the terminology of logic. They added to the study of the 5 universals the study of its fruit, namely, the discussion of definitions and descriptions, which they took over from the Apodeictica. They discarded the categories, because the logicians' study of the book is accidental and not essential. To the hermeneutics they added the discussion of the conversion of terms, whereas the ancient books included that subject in the topics. 698. But, in some respects, it does fall under the discussion of propositions. Then, they discussed analogical reasoning inasmuch as it produces the desired information in general, and without regard to any matter. They discarded study of the matter to which analogical reasoning is applied. That concerned 5 books: the Apodeictica, the Topics, the Rhetoric, the Poetics, and the Sophisticae Leci. Some of them occasionally touched a little on those books. But in general, they neglected them, as if they had never been, whereas they are a very important basis of the discipline. Then, they thoroughly discussed their writings on logic and studied them as a discipline in its own right, not as an instrument for the sciences. This resulted in a long and extensive discussion of the subject. The first to do this was the Imam Fakhruddin b. Al-Khatib 699. He was followed by Afdal-ad-Din al-Quji 700. Al-Quji's books are used by contemporary Easterners as reference works. On logic, he wrote the long Kitab Kashf al-Azra, the Muqtasar al-Mujiz, which is good as a textbook, and the Muqtasar al-Jumal 701. The last mentioned work consists of 4 leaves and gives a synopsis of the discipline and its basic principles. Contemporary students use it and profit from it. The books and methods of the ancients are avoided, as if they had never been, although they are full of the results and useful aspects of logic, as we have stated. God is the guide to that which is correct. It 702 should be known that the early Muslims and the early speculative theologians greatly disapproved of the study of this discipline. They vehemently attacked it and warned against it. They forbade the study and teaching of it. Later on, ever since Al-Ghazali and the Imam Ibn al-Khatib, scholars have been somewhat more lenient in this respect. Since that time, they have gone on studying logic, except for a few who have recourse to the opinion of the ancients concerning it and shun it and vehemently disapprove of it. Let us explain on what the acceptance or rejection of logic depends, so that it will be known what scholars have in mind with their different opinions. This comes about as follows. When the theologians invented the science of speculative theology, in order to support the articles of faith with rational evidence, their approach was to use some particular evidence, which they mentioned in their books. Thus, they proved the createdness of the world by affirming that accidents exist and are created, that bodies cannot possibly be free from accidents, and that something that cannot be free from created things must itself be created. Or, they affirmed the oneness of God by the argument of mutual antagonism 703. They affirmed the existence of primeval attributes with reference to the 4 comprehensive attributes 704, in that they drew conclusions from the visible as to the supernatural. There are other such arguments mentioned in their books. Then, they strengthened that evidence by inventing basic principles constituting a sort of premises for the evidence. Thus, they affirmed the existence of atomic matter and atomic time and the vacuum. They denied nature 705 and the intellectual combination of quiddities. They affirmed that an accident does not persist 2 moments 706. They also affirmed the existence of the state, that is, an attribute of something existing, that neither exists nor yet does not exist 707. They have still other basic principles upon which they have built their particular arguments. It then came to be the opinion of Shaykh Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, Judge Abu Bakr al-Baqili, and Professor Abu Ashaq al-Asfari, that the evidence for the articles of faith is reversible in the sense that if the arguments are wrong, the things proven by them are wrong 708. Therefore, Judge Abu Bakr thought that the arguments for the articles of faith hold the same position as the articles of faith themselves, and that an attack against them is an attack against the articles of faith, because they rest on those arguments. Now, if one considers logic, one will find that it all revolves around intellectual combination and the affirmation of the outside existence of a natural universal to which must correspond the mental universal that is divided into the 5 universals, namely, genus, species, difference, property, and general accident. 709. This is wrong in the opinion of the speculative theologians. The universal and essential is to them merely a mental concept having no correspondence outside the mind, or, to those who believe in the theory of states, it is merely a state. Thus, the 5 universals, the definitions based on them, and the 10 categories are wrong. And the essential attribute is a wrong concept and does not exist. This implies that the essential and necessary propositions on which argumentation is predicated are wrong and that the rational cause is a wrong concept and does not exist. Thus, the apodeictica is wrong, and the places, topoi, which are the central part of the topics are a wrong concept. They were the things from which one derives the middle term that brings the 2 ends together in analogical reasoning. 710. The only thing that remains is formal analogical reasoning, the syllogism. 711. The only remaining definition is the one that is equally true for all details of the thing defined and cannot be more general, because then other matters would enter it, nor can it be more restricted, because then part of those details would be left out. That is what the grammarians express by jam and man, and the speculative theologians by tard and ox, complete identity of the definition and the thing defined, and reversibility of the definition. 712. Thus, all the pillars of logic are destroyed. On the other hand, if we affirm their existence, as is done in logic, we, thereby, declare wrong many of the premises of the speculative theologians. This, then, leads to considering wrong their arguments for the articles of faith, as has been mentioned before. This is why the early theologians vehemently disapproved of the study of logic and considered it innovation or unbelief, depending on the particular argument declared wrong, by the use of logic. However, recent theologians since Al-Ghazali have disapproved of the idea of the reversibility of arguments and have not assumed that the fact that the arguments are wrong requires as its necessary consequence that the thing proven by them be wrong. They considered correct the opinion of logicians concerning intellectual combination and the outside existence of natural quiddities and their universals. Therefore, they decided that logic is not in contradiction with the articles of faith, even though it is in contradiction to some of the arguments for them. In fact, they concluded that many of the premises of the speculative theologians were wrong. For instance, they deny the existence of atomic matter and the vacuum and affirm, 713, the persistence of accidents, and so on. For the arguments of the theologians for the articles of faith, they substituted other arguments which they proved to be correct by means of speculation and analogical reasoning. They hold that this goes in no way against the orthodox articles of faith. This is the opinion of the Imam, Fakhr ad-Din Ibn al-Khattab, 714 Al-Ghazali, and their contemporary followers. This should be considered. The methods and sources used by religious scholars to form their opinions should be understood. God gives guidance and success to that which is correct. 23. Physics. This is a science that investigates bodies from the point of view of the motion and stationariness which attach to them. It studies the heavenly and the elementary bodies, substances, as well as the human beings, the animals, the plants, and the minerals created from them. It also studies the springs and earthquakes that come into being in the earth, as well as the clouds, vapors, thunder, lightning, and storms that are in the atmosphere, and other things. It further studies the beginning of motion in bodies, that is, the soul in the different forms in which it appears in human beings, animals, and plants. The books of Aristotle on the subject are available to scholars. They were translated together with the other books on the philosophical sciences in the days of Al-Mamnu. Scholars wrote books along the same lines and followed them up with explanation and comment. 715. The most comprehensive work written on the subject is Avicenna's Kitab ash-Shifa. In it, Avicenna treats all the 7 philosophical sciences, as we have mentioned before. 716. Avicenna later on abridged the Kitab ash-Shifa in the Kitab an-Najah and the Kitab al-Isharat. In a way, he opposed Aristotle on most physical problems and expressed his own opinion on them. Averroes, on the other hand, abridged the books of Aristotle and commented on them, but followed him and did not oppose him. Scholars have written many works on the subject, 717, but these are the works that are famous at this time and to which attention is paid when one studies the craft of physics. The people of the East are concerned with Avicenna's Kitab al-Isharat. The Imam Ibn al-Khattab wrote a good commentary on it. The same was done by Al-Amid. 718. Another commentary on the work was written by Asir ad-Din at-Tusi, 719, who is known as Khawaja Koha, an Iraqi scholar. He investigated many of the problems of the Isharat, and compared what the Imam Ibn al-Khattab had to say about them. He went beyond Ibn al-Khattab's studies and investigations. And he knows more than any scholar. 720. 24. The Science of Medicine. 721. Medicine is a craft that studies the human body in its illness and health. The physician attempts to preserve health and to cure illness with the help of medicines and diets, but first he ascertains the illness peculiar to each limb of the body, and the reasons causing them. He also ascertains the medicines existing for each illness. Physicians deduce the effectiveness of medicines from their composition and powers. They deduce the stage of an illness from signs indicating whether the illness is ripe and will accept the medicine or not. These signs show themselves in the color of the patient, the excretions, and the pulse. The physicians in this imitate the power of nature, which is the controlling element in both health and illness. They imitate nature and help it a little, as the nature of the matter underlying the illness, the season of the year, and the age of the patient, may require in each particular case. The science dealing with all these things is called medicine. Certain limbs are occasionally discussed as individual subjects and are considered to form the subjects of special sciences. This is the case, for instance, with the eye, the diseases of the eye, and the chorea, used in the treatment of eye diseases. Scholars have also added to this discipline the study of the uses of the parts of the body, that is, the useful purpose for which each limb of the animal body was created. This is not a medical subject, but it has been made into an annex and subdivision of medicine. Gale has written an important and very useful work on this discipline. 722. Gale is the leading ancient authority on medicine. His works have been translated into Arabic. He is said to have been a contemporary of Jesus and to have died in Sicily on his wanderings while in voluntary exile. 723. His works on medicine are classics which have been models for all later physicians. There have been leading physicians in Islam of surpassing skill, such as, for instance, Ar-Razi, 724, Al-Majasi, 725, and Avicenna. There have also been many Spanish physicians. Most famous among them was Ibn Tuah. 726. In contemporary Muslim cities, the craft of medicine seems to have deteriorated, because the civilization, population, has decreased and shrunk. Medicine is a craft required only by sedentary culture and luxury, as we shall explain later on. 727. Civilized Bedouins have a kind of medicine which is mainly based upon individual experience. They inherit its use from the sheikhs and old women of the tribe. Some of it may occasionally be correct. However, that kind of medicine is not based upon any natural norm or upon any conformity of the treatment to the temper of the humus. Much of this sort of medicine existed among the Arabs. They had well-known physicians, such as Al-Harith b. Qalada 728 and others. The medicine mentioned in religious tradition 729 is of the Bedouin type. It is in no way part of the divine revelation. Such medical matters were merely part of Arab custom and happened to be mentioned in connection with the circumstances of the Prophet, like other things that were customary in his generation. They were not mentioned in order to imply that that particular way of practicing medicine is stipulated by the religious law. Muhammad was sent to teach us the religious law. He was not sent to teach us medicine or any other ordinary matter. In connection with the story of the fecadatio of the palms, he said, "You know more about your worldly affairs than I." 730. None of the statements concerning medicine that occur in sound traditions should be considered to have the force of law. There is nothing to indicate that this is the case. The only thing is that if that type of medicine is used for the sake of a divine blessing and 731 in true religious faith, it may be very useful. However, that would have nothing to do with humoral medicine but be the result of true faith. This happened in the case of the person who had a stomachache and was treated with honey, 732 and similar stories. God guides to that which is correct. 25. The Science of Agriculture. 733. This craft is a branch of physics. It concerns the study of the cultivation and growth of plants through irrigation, proper treatment, improvement of the soil, 734, observance of the suitable season, and the care for them by applying these things in a way that will benefit them and help them to grow. The ancients were very much concerned with agriculture. Their study of agriculture was general. They considered the plants both from the point of view of planting and cultivation and from the point of view of their properties, their spirituality, and the relationship of their spirituality to the spiritualities of the stars and the great heavenly bodies, which is something also used in sorcery. Thus, they were very much concerned with the subject. One of the Greek works, the Kitab al-Falaha an-Nabatiyya, 735 was translated. It is ascribed to Nabatean scholars. It contains much information of the type mentioned. The Muslims who studied the contents of the work noticed that it belonged to sorcery, which is barred by the religious law, and the study of which is forbidden. Therefore, they restricted themselves to the part of the book dealing with plants from the point of view of their planting and treatment and the things connected with that. They completely banished all discussion of the other part of the book. Ibn al-Awwam 736 abridged the Kitab al-Falaha an-Nabatiyya in this sense. The other part of it remained neglected. Some of the main problems of that other part were transmitted by Maslam or in his magical works. We shall mention that in connection with the discussion of sorcery, if God, He is exalted, will 737 there are many books on agriculture by recent scholars. They do not go beyond discussion of the planting and treatment of plants, their preservation from things that might harm them or affect their growth, and all the things connected with that. These works are available. 26. The Science of Metaphysics. Metaphysics is a science that, metaphysicians, assume, studies existence as such. First, it studies general matters affecting corporeal and spiritual things, such as the quiddities, oneness, plurality, necessity, possibility, and so on. Then, it studies the beginnings of existing things and finds that they are spiritual things. It goes on to study the way existing things issue from spiritual things, and also studies their order. Then, it studies the conditions of the soul after its separation from the body and its return to its beginning. The metaphysicians are of the opinion that metaphysics is a noble discipline. They assume that it gives them a knowledge of existence as it is. This, they think, is identical with happiness. They will be refuted later on 738 in their arrangements. Metaphysics comes after physics. Therefore, they called it that which comes after physics, metaphysics. 738. The books of the first teacher 739 on the subject are available to scholars. They were abridged by Avicenna in the Kitab ash-Shifa and the Ajah. They were also abridged by the Spanish philosopher, Averroes. Recent scholars wrote systematic treatments of the sciences of the people, the Muslims. Al-Ghazali, at that time, refuted a good many of the opinions of the metaphysicians. Recent speculative theologians, then, confused the problems of theology with those of philosophy, because the investigations of theology and philosophy go in the same direction, and the subject and problems of theology are similar to the subject and problems of metaphysics 740. Theology and metaphysics, thus, in a way came to be one and the same discipline. The recent theologians, then, changed the order in which the philosophers had treated the problems of physics and metaphysics. They merged the two sciences in one and the same discipline. Now, in that discipline, they first discussed general matters. This was followed, successively, by the discussion of the corporeal things and the matters that belong to them, the spiritual things and the matters that belong to them, and so on to the end of the discipline. The Imam Ibn al-Khattab, 741 for instance, proceeded in this manner in the Mabda'ith al-Mashriqiyya, and so did all later theologians. The science of speculative theology thus merged with the problems of philosophy, and theological works were filled with the latter. It seemed as if the purpose which theology and philosophy followed in their respective subjects and problems was one and the same. This confused people, but it is not correct. The problems with which the science of speculative theology deals are articles of faith derived from the religious law as transmitted by the early Muslims. They have no reference to the intellect and do not depend on it in the sense that they could not be established except through it. The intellect has nothing to do with the religious law and its views. Speculative theologians do not use the rational arguments they talk about as do the philosophers, in order to investigate the truth of the articles of faith, to prove the truth of what had previously not been known, and to make it known. Their use of rational arguments merely expresses a desire to have rational arguments with which to bolster the articles of faith and the opinions of the early Muslims concerning them, and to refute the doubts of innovators who believe that their perceptions of the articles of faith in their interpretation are rational ones. Rational arguments were used only 742 after the correctness of the articles of faith, as they had been received and believed in by the early Muslims, had been stipulated by traditional evidence. There is a great difference between the two positions. The perceptions which the master of the religious law, Muhammad, had are wider than those of philosophers, because they go beyond rational views. They are above them and include them, because they draw their support from the divine light. Thus, they do not fall into the canon of weak speculation and circumscribed 743 perceptions. When the lawgiver, Muhammad, guides us towards some perception, we must prefer that perception to our own perceptions. We must have more confidence in it than in them. We must not seek to prove its correctness rationally, even if rational intelligence contradicts it. We must believe and know what we have been commanded to believe and to know. We must be silent with regard to things of this sort that we do not understand. We must leave them to the lawgiver, Muhammad, and keep the intellect out of it. The only thing that caused the theologians to use rational arguments was the discussions of heretics who opposed the early Muslim articles of faith with speculative innovations. Thus, they had to refute these heretics with the same kind of arguments. This situation called for using speculative arguments and checking on the early Muslim articles of faith with these arguments. The verification or rejection of physical and metaphysical problems, on the other hand, is not part of the subject of speculative theology and does not belong to the same kind of speculations as those of the theologians. This should be known, so that one may be able to distinguish between the two disciplines, as they have been confused in the works of recent scholars. The truth is that they are different from each other in their respective subjects and problems. The confusion arose from the sameness of the topics discussed. The argumentation of the theologians thus came to look as though it were inaugurating a search for faith through rational evidence. This is not so. Speculative theology merely wants to refute heretics. The things it investigates are stipulated by the religious law and known to be true. Likewise, recent extremist Sufis, those who speak about ecstatic experiences, have confused the problems of metaphysics and speculative theology with their own discipline. They discussed all these things as part of one and the same subject. Thus, they discussed prophecy, union, incarnation, oneness, and other things. In fact, however, the perceptions of the three disciplines are distinct and different from each other. The Sufi perceptions are the ones that are least scientific. The Sufis claim intuitive 744 experience in connection with their perceptions and shun rational evidence. But intuitive experience is far removed from scientific perceptions and ways and the things that go with them, as we have explained above and as we shall, again, explain later on 745. God is the guide to that which is correct. 27. The sciences of sorcery and talismans. These are sciences showing how human souls may become prepared to exercise an influence upon the world of the elements, either without any aid or with the aid of celestial matters. The first kind is sorcery. The second kind is talismans. These sciences are forbidden by the various religious laws, because they are harmful and require their practitioners to direct themselves to beings other than God, such as stars and other things. Therefore, books dealing with them are almost non-existent among the people. The only exceptions are the books of the ancient nations from before the time of Moses' prophecy, such as the Nabateans and the Chaldeans. None of the prophets who preceded Moses made or brought any laws. Their books were concerned with exhortations, with the recognition of the oneness of God, and with references to paradise and hell. 746. The magical sciences were cultivated among the Syrian and Chaldean inhabitants of Babel and among the Copts of Egypt, and others. They composed books dealing with them and left information concerning their occupation with them. Only very few of their books have been translated for us. One book that was translated, for instance, is the Phalaharanabhatiya, 747, a Babylonian work. People learned the science of sorcery from that work and developed its manifold branches. Later on, other works on sorcery were composed. Among such works were the books, Masayif, of the 7 stars, and the Book of Tumtum, the Indian 748, on the figures of the degrees, of the signs of the zodiac, and the stars, and works by other authors. Later on, Jabir B. Haya, 749, the chief sorcerer of Islam, appeared in the East. He scrutinized the scholarly books and discovered the art, the craft of sorcery and alchemy. He studied its essence and brought it out. He wrote a number of works on sorcery. He lengthily discussed both sorcery and the craft of alchemy, which goes together with sorcery, because the transformation of specific bodies, substances, from one form into another is effected by psychic powers, and not by a practical technique. Thus it is a sort of sorcery, as we shall mention in the proper place 750. Then, Maslam or B. Ahmed al-Majriti, 751, the leading Spanish scholar in the mathematical, scientific, and magical sciences, made his appearance. He abridged all these books and corrected them and collected all their different approaches in his Gayat al-Hakim. Nobody has written on this science since. Let us present here some prefatory remarks that will explain the real meaning of sorcery. It is as follows. Human souls are one in species. However, they differ in view of their particular qualities. 752, they are of different kinds. Each kind is distinguished by a particular quality which does not exist in any other kind of soul. These qualities come to constitute a natural disposition belonging, exclusively, to its particular kind of soul. The souls of the prophets have a particular quality through which they are prepared 753 to have divine knowledge, to be addressed by the angels in the name of God, as has been mentioned before, 754, and to exercise the influence upon created beings that goes with all that. The souls of certain sorcerers also have the quality of being able to exercise influence upon created beings and to attract the spirituality of the stars, so that they can use it for being active among created beings, and be able to exercise an influence through either a psychic or a satanic power. Now, the prophets are able to exercise their influence with the help of God and by means of a divine quality. The souls of soothsayers, on the other hand, have a quality enabling them to observe supernatural things by means of satanic powers. Thus, every kind of soul is distinguished by its particular quality, which does not exist in any other kind. The souls that have magical ability are of 3 degrees. These 3 degrees will now be explained here. The first kind exercises its influence merely through mental power, without any instrument or aid. This is what the philosophers call sorcery. The second kind exercises its influence with the aid of the temper of the spheres and the elements, or with the aid of the properties of numbers. This is called talismans. It is weaker in degree than the first kind. The third kind exercises its influence upon the powers of imagination. The person who exercises this kind of influence relies upon the powers of imagination. He is somehow active in them. He plants among them different sorts of phantasms, images, and pictures, whichever he intends to use. Then, he brings them down to the level of the sensual perception of the observers with the help of the power of his soul that exercises an influence over that sensual perception, As a result, the phantasms, etc., appear to the observers to exist in the external world, while, in fact, there is nothing of the sort. For instance, a person is said to have seen gardens, rivers, and castles, while, in fact, there was nothing of the sort. This is what the philosophers call prestidigitation, shawadha or shabadha. Those are the different degrees of sorcery. Now, the sorcerer possesses his particular quality in potentiality, as is the case with all human powers. It is transformed from potentiality into actuality by exercise. All magical exercise consists of directing oneself to the spheres, the stars, the higher worlds, or to the devils by means of various kinds of veneration and worship and submissiveness and humiliation. Thus, magical exercise is devotion and adoration directed to beings other than God. Such devotion is unbelief. Therefore, sorcery is unbelief, or unbelief forms part of the substance and motives of sorcery, as has been seen. Consequently, sorcerers must be killed. Jurists differ only as to whether they must be killed because of the unbelief which is antecedent to the practice of sorcery, or because of their corrupting activity and the resulting corruption of created beings. All this comes from sorcerers and sorcery. Furthermore, since the first two degrees of sorcery are real and the third and last degree is not real, scholars differ as to whether sorcery is real or merely imaginary. Those who say that it is real have the first two degrees in mind. Those who say that it is not real have the third and last degree in mind. There is no difference of opinion among them about the matter itself, but the difference of opinion results from confusing the different degrees of sorcery. And God knows better. It should be known that no intelligent person doubts the existence of sorcery, because of the influence mentioned, which sorcery exercises. The Qur'an refers to it. It says, "But the devils were unbelievers, teaching the people sorcery and that which had been revealed in Babel to the two angels, Harut and Marut. Those two always said before they taught anyone, 'We are a temptation. Do not be an unbeliever.' People learned from them how to cause discord between a man and his wife. However, they were not able to harm anyone except with God's permission." 755. The Messenger of God, according to the sound tradition of the Sahih, 756, was put under a magic spell, so that he imagined that he was doing a thing while, in fact, he was not doing it. The spell against him was placed in a comb, in flakes of wool, and in the spathe of a palm, and buried in the well of Dawa. 757. Therefore, God revealed to him the following verses in the Muawwidhata, and, "I take refuge in God, from the evil of the women who blow into knots." 758. Aisha said, as soon as he recited the Qur'an over one of those knots into which a spell against him had been placed, that particular knot became untied. 759. There was much sorcery among the inhabitants of Babel, that is, the Nabatean and Syrian Chaldeans. The Qur'an mentions much of it, and there are traditions about it. Sorcery was greatly cultivated in Babel and in Egypt at the time of Moses' prophetic mission. Therefore, the miracle Moses performed, as a proof of his prophecy, was of the kind claimed and bragged about by sorcerers. The temples in Upper Egypt are remnants of sorcery, attesting to the cultivation of sorcery in ancient Egypt. 760. We have seen with our own eyes how a sorcerer formed the picture of a person who was to be cast under a spell. He represented in it the characteristics of things he intended and planned to make that person adopt, as already existing in him in the shape of symbols of names and attributes in homonym fashion. 761 Then he spoke magic words over the picture he had made to take the place of the person who was to be cast under a spell, concretely or symbolically. 762 During the repeated pronunciation of the evil words, he collected spittle in his mouth and spat upon the picture. Then he tied a knot over the symbol in an object that he had prepared for the purpose. 763 Since he considered tying knots and making things stick together to be auspicious and effective in magical operations, he also entered into a pact with the jinn, asking them to participate in his spitting during the operation, intending to make the spell forceful. This human figure and the evil names have a harmful spirit. It issues from the sorcerer with his breath and attaches to the spittle he spits out. It produces more evil spirits. As a result, the things that the sorcerer intends to happen to the person who is cast under a spell actually befall him. We have also observed how people who practice sorcery point at a garment or a piece of leather and inwardly speak magic words over it, and behold, the object is torn to shreds. Others point in the same way at the bellies of sheep and goats at pasture with a ripping gesture, and behold, the guts of the animals fall out of their bellies to the ground. 764. We have also heard that in contemporary India, there still are sorcerers who point at a man, and his heart is extracted. 765 And he falls dead. When someone looks for his heart, he cannot find it among his inner parts. Or, they point to a pomegranate. When someone opens it, no seeds are found in it. We have likewise heard that in the Sudan and in the land of the Turks, there are sorcerers who cast a spell on a cloud, and rain falls upon a particular area. 766. Also, we have observed remarkable things as to the efficacy of talismans that make use of the loving numbers 220 and 284. The sum of the aliquot parts of each of the loving numbers, such as 1/2, 1/4, 1/6, a fifth, and so on, is equal to the other number 767. This is why the two numbers are called loving numbers. It is a tradition among the people who know about talismans that these numbers may affect friendship and union between two lovers. Two effigies are made, one of them with Venus as the ascendant, when, either in her house or in her exaltation. 768 She looks at the moon lovingly and invitingly. As the ascendant of the other effigy, the seventh house counting from that of the first is taken. One of the loving numbers is placed upon the one effigy, and the other upon the other. The larger number is meant for the person whose friendship is sought, that is, the beloved. I do not know whether larger number means the higher number, or the one with the greater number of aliquot parts. The result of the magical operation is a close connection between the two lovers, so that the one is hardly able to break away from the other. This was reported by the author of the Gaya 769 and other authorities on magic, and it is attested by experience. 770. Then, there is the lion seal, 771, which is also called the pebble seal. 772 On a steel thimble. 773 The sorcerer engraves the picture of a lion dragging its tail and biting on pebbles, which it thus divides into two parts. A snake is represented in front of the lion. It is coiled at the lion's feet, stretching upwards opposite the lion's head, so that its open mouth faces the lion's mouth. Upon the lion's back, a crawling scorpion is represented. In order to make the engraving, the sorcerer waits for a time when the sun enters the first or third deca. 774 of Leo, provided, further, that the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, are well and out of their misfortune. When he finds and gets this constellation, he makes an impression of the engraving upon a mithcule or less of gold, which he then dips into saffron dissolved in rose water and preserves 775 in a yellow silk rag. People assume that the person who holds onto it has an indescribable power over rulers and is able to have close contact with them, to serve them, and to use them for his own ends. Likewise, the rulers themselves find in it strength and power over their subjects. This, too, was mentioned by authors on magic in the Gayar 776 and other works, and it is attested by experience. Then, there is the magic square of 36 fields that belongs to the sun 777. It has been said that it should be made when the sun enters its exaltation and is out of its misfortune, and when the moon is well and under a royal ascendant, in which the master of the 10th house is considered to look upon the master of the ascendant lovingly and invitingly, and in which exalted indications concerning royal nativities prosper. It is preserved in a yellow silk rag, after having been dipped in perfume. People think that it influences one's friendship with rulers and one's opportunity to serve them and to be admitted into their company. There are many similar things. The Kitab al-Gayar by Maslam or B. Ahmed al-Majriti is the systematic treatment of this craft. It has it complete and presents its problems perfectly. We have been told that the Imam Fakhruddin B. al-Khattab wrote a book on the subject which he entitled As-Sirr al-Maktum. It is said to be in common use among the people in the East. We have not come across it. The Imam, Fakhruddin, is not considered an authority on magic, though the contrary might be the case, and he might have been an authority on magic. 778. In the Maghrib, there is a type of magical practitioners who are known as Rupas, Ba'aj. They are the people to whom I referred above. 779. They point at a garment or a piece of leather, and it is torn to shreds. Or they point at the bellies of sheep and goats, with a ripping gesture, and they are ripped open. Such sorcerers nowadays are called rippers in the Maghrib, because most of their magical practice concerns ripping animals open. In that way, they frighten the owners of animals into giving them some animal they can spare. They keep their activities very much undercover. 780. Because they are afraid of the authorities. I have met a number of them and witnessed their kind of magical practice. They informed me that they practice devotions and exercises. Their devotions and exercises consist, in particular, of heretical prayers and of association with the spiritualities of jinn and stars. These things are written down on a sheet of paper they possess, and called Al-Kitiriyah. 781. They study it together. With the help of such exercises and devotions, they succeed in performing their magical actions. The influence they are able to exercise affects only objects other than free men. It affects, for instance, utensils, animals, and slaves. They express the idea by the words 782 things into which there goes money. 783. That is, all the things that are owned, sold, and bought. This is what they think. I questioned one of them, and he told me what I have mentioned here. Their magical actions are plain fact. We have come across very much of it. We have observed them with our own eyes and have no doubt about it. This is the situation with regard to sorcery and talismans and their influence in the world. The philosophers made a distinction between sorcery and talismans. First, however, they affirmed that both derive their effectiveness from influences of the human soul. They deduced the existence of an influence of the human soul from the fact that the soul exercises an influence upon its own body that cannot be explained by the natural course of affairs or from corporeal reasons. At times, it results from the qualities of the spirits such as heat, which originates from pleasure and joy, and at other times, it results from other psychic perceptions 784 such as the things that result from imagination, Tawahum. Thus, a person who walks upon the ledge of a wall or upon a high tightrope 785 will certainly fall down if the idea of falling down is strongly present in his imagination. Therefore, there are many people who train themselves to get used to such things, so that they are not troubled by their imagination. They can walk upon the ledge of a wall or a high tightrope without fear of falling down. It is thus definite that we have here the result of an influence of the human soul and of the soul's imagining of the idea of falling down. If the soul can thus influence its own body without any natural corporeal causes, it is also possible that it can exercise a similar influence upon bodies other than its own. Its position with regard to its ability to exercise this type of influence is the same with regard to all bodies, since it is neither inherent nor firmly impressed in a particular body. Therefore, it is definite that the soul is able to exercise an influence upon other bodies. Now, the distinction the philosophers make between sorcery and talismans is this. In sorcery, the sorcerer does not need any aid, while those who work with talismans seek the aid of the spiritualities of the stars, the secrets of numbers, the particular qualities of existing things, and the positions of the sphere that exercise an influence upon the world of the elements. As the astrologers maintain, the philosophers, therefore, say that sorcery is a union of spirit with spirit, while the talisman is a union of spirit with body, substance, 786 as they understand it. That means that the high celestial natures are tied together with the low, terrestrial, natures. The high natures being the spiritualities of the stars. Those who work with talismans, therefore, as a rule, seek the aid of astrology. The philosophers think that a sorcerer does not acquire his magical ability but has, by nature, the particular disposition needed for exercising that type of influence. They think that the difference between miracles and sorcery is this. A miracle is a divine power that arouses in the soul the ability to exercise influence. The worker of miracles is supported in his activity by the Spirit of God. The sorcerer, on the other hand, does his work by himself and with the help of his own psychic power, and, under certain conditions, with the support of devils. The difference between the two actually concerns the idea, reality, and essence of the matter. We, however, prefer to deduce the differentiation merely from obvious signs. That is, miracles are found to be wrought by good persons for good purposes and by souls that are entirely devoted to good deeds. Moreover, they include the advance challenge, Tahaddi, 787 of the claim to prophesy. Sorcery, on the other hand, is found, practiced, only by evil persons and as a rule is used for evil actions, 788 such as causing discord between husband and wife, doing harm to enemies, and similar things. And it is found, practiced, by souls that are entirely devoted to evil deeds. This is the difference between prophecy and sorcery, in the opinion of metaphysicians. Among the Sufis, some who are favored by acts of divine grace are also able to exercise an influence upon worldly conditions. This, however, is not counted as a kind of sorcery. It is effected with divine support, because the attitude and approach of these men result from prophecy and are a consequence of it. They enjoy divine support, as befits their state and faith and belief in the cause of God. Were someone among them capable of doing evil deeds, he would not do them, because he is bound by the divine command in whatever he may do or not do. Whatever he is not permitted to do, he would certainly not do. Were he to, he would deviate from the path of truth and would in all likelihood lose his state. Miracles take place with the support of the Spirit of God and the divine powers. Therefore, no piece of sorcery can match them. One may compare the affair of the sorcerers of Pharaoh with Moses and the miracle of the staff. Moses' staff devoured the phantoms the sorcerers produced, and their sorcery completely disappeared as if it had never been. 789. Also, the following verse was revealed to the prophet in the Muqaddimah, and, I take refuge in God, from the evil of the women who blow into knots. In this connection, Ashar said, as soon as he recited the Qur'an over one of the knots into which a spell against him had been placed, that particular knot became untied. 790. Sorcery cannot last whenever the name of God is mentioned in a believing state of mind. 791. The historians report that the Daruf Shaikavia 792, that is, the banner of the Persian emperor, had a magic square of 100 fields 793 woven into it in gold. That had been done when there were certain astronomical positions that had been, especially, observed for the purpose of writing down the magic square. The banner was found on the day Rustam was killed at Al-Qadisiyah. It was lying on the ground after the flight and dispersal of the Persians. The people who work with talismans and magic squares think that such a magic square means victory in war, and that a banner containing it or accompanied by it could never be routed. However, the spell was counteracted by divine support, which resulted from the faith of the men around the prophet and their belief in the cause of God. Through the presence of faith, any magic spell was dissolved and did not last, this time, as it will always happen whenever faith is involved, and what they did came to naught. 794. The religious law makes no distinction between sorcery, talismans, and prestidigitation. It puts them all into the same class of forbidden things. The lawgiver, Muhammad, permitted us only those actions that are of relevance to us in our religion, which concerns the well-being of our life in the other world, and in our livelihood, which concerns the well-being of our life in this world. Things that are of no relevance in these two respects and that may cause harm or some kind of harm, are forbidden, and the strictness of the prohibition is, in proportion to the harm they might do. Among such, irrelevant and harmful, things are sorcery, which causes harm when it is practiced. Talismans belong together with it, because the effect of sorcery and talismans is the same. There is also astrology, which causes a certain harm in that the belief in astral influences, referring as it does to beings other than God, corrupts the Muslim faith. As to things that are of no relevance to us but cause no harm, nothing is easier than not to do them, in order to be close to God. 795. For a good Muslim does not do what does not concern him. 796. Thus, the religious law puts sorcery, talismans, and prestidigitation into one and the same class, because they may cause harm. It brands them as forbidden and illegal. The speculative theologians said that the difference between miracles and sorcery lies in their advance challenge, Tahadi, 797, that is, the claim that a miracle will occur just as it has been claimed, in advance that it would happen. It is not possible, they said, that a miracle could happen in agreement with the claim of a liar. Logic requires that a miracle indicate truthfulness. By definition, a miracle is something that can be verified. If it were performed with lying intentions, it could not be verified and thus truth would have changed into falsehood, and that is absurd. Therefore, miracles never occur together with lying intentions. 798. As we have mentioned, 799 the philosophers assume that the difference between miracles and sorcery is the difference between the two extremes of good and evil. Nothing good issues from a sorcerer, and sorcery is not employed in good causes. Nothing evil issues from a worker of miracles, and miracles are not employed in evil causes. Miracles and sorcery are in a way contradictory by their very natures, as are good and evil. God guides whomever he wants to guide. 800. The evil eye. Another psychic influence is that of the eye, that is, an influence exercised by the soul of the person who has the evil eye. 801 A thing or situation appears pleasing to the eye of a person, and he likes it very much. This circumstance creates in him envy and the desire to take it away from its owner. Therefore, he prefers to destroy him. It is a natural gift, I mean, the eye. The difference between it and the other 802 psychic influences is that it appears and acts as something natural and innate. It cannot be left alone. It does not depend on the free choice of its possessor. It is not acquired by him. Some of the other psychic influences may also not be acquired ones, but their appearance in action depends on the free choice of the person who exercises them. The thing that characterizes them as natural is their possessor's potential ability to exercise them, not their automatic action. 803 Therefore it has been said, a person who kills by means of sorcery or a miraculous act must be killed. But the person who kills with the eye must not be killed. The only reason for the distinction is that the person who kills with the eye did not want or intend to do so, nor could he have avoided doing so. The application of the eye was 804. Involuntary on his part. And God knows better.